Hey everybody, this is EDBEAT. I'm April on TV, and joining me as always, young Patrick.
Hi, April. Hey, stranger. How's it going?
It's been quite a while. I have all this hair to show off today because went to the beach yesterday, and man, it was about like Rosanna Dana style. So I am refreshed and ready to go. It has been a busy January on many fronts, but now we're into February, so it is time to hit the ground rolling, Patrick.
You got that right.
Yes.
We
All
have
right.
so much
So
to talk about today.
yeah, that's my favorite. So much to talk about. Oh, we always have so much to talk about. All right. So on this episode of EdBeat, where we discuss the breaking news in education and then sometimes the investigative work of Patrick at Cayman Current. See how I did that there, Patrick? Investigative work. Um, let's start with the big giant story on the front of Cayman Current, or as I like to say, above the fold of my computer.
Yep, that's the three-deck headline
Yeah.
on the front page. Yeah, so what we're talking about, or the big story on the homepage today, is kind of the, not really the inside story, but the official on the record story of the circumstances surrounding the departure of UCCI's president and CEO Stacey McAfee, who ended her tenure towards the end of last year. And before last week, we had heard all we really had was official statements and press releases and announcements, which is kind of the sanitized version of personnel decisions, really. So what I got my grubby little fingers on, and what anybody else can as well, is the minutes from the UCCI Board of Governors meetings from about May through December. So it's 8 months worth of meetings, all came gift wrapped for us like a late Christmas present, and spent a couple days reading through them and was able to piece together what I think is a somewhat coherent timeline of the events that culminated in Dr. McAfee leaving UCCI and the Cayman Islands.
So, for those of you who may not have been following along, um, Stacey McAfee or Dr. McAfee was almost at celebrity status in some respects, in my view, in that she came down, she met everybody all over everywhere. She worked very hard to raise funds for the institution and really to kind of and it was kind of a nice dynamic energy that she brought to the equation. It was change certainly, and I'm sure that change isn't always enjoyed by all parties affected. And I can't speak to whether she did a great job or a terrible job as a president, but I can say she was certainly highly visible and definitely created buzz about what was going on at UCCI. And so for some, it was a surprise to see her leave.
Yes, and point out that Dr. McAfee, along with the new acting president and CEO, JD Mosley Matchett, have joined the short but distinguished list of guest celebrities who've appeared on EdBeat. So if you go back in our archives, you can see the good conversation that we had with both of those leaders about the vision for UCCI. And because Dr. Mosley Matchett has been elevated to acting president, I can say it's still timely and still relevant.
It is, and it's a very interesting conversation, especially seeing how much changed so quickly afterwards. But you could definitely hear a strong sense of alignment about what the future of UCCI might look like, what they were aspiring to, where they were heading. So, you know, it was a bit of a surprise, for lack of a better phrase, when Dr. McAfee suddenly was no longer going to be in the and on the next episode of EdBeat. No, I'm kidding about that, but it was certainly a surprise because she sounded extremely confident about the future and the work that they were doing, and spoke very highly of how the institution was adapting and growing.
Yeah, and I think to kind of ground this discussion in the bigger timeline picture, is Dr. McAfee succeeded former university president Roy Bodden. She began her tenure January 1st, 2019, and she was signed to a 3-year contract, which ended 31st December 2021. But in alignment with Dr. McAfee's hiring was the adoption and launch of the UCCI's 5-year strategic plan. So the way that we've talked about this and couched this is Dr. McAfee's main performance metric was going to be the substance of the 5-year plan itself. Did it turn out to be a good plan? And also, how is the university progressing along the benchmarks and the goals laid out in the 5-year plan? So when she was signed initially to this 3-year contract, the understanding was when she started approaching the end of the first 3-year term, the board would evaluate her performance, and with the option to re-up the contract for a further 3 years, which takes you through the end of the 5-year timeline and probably the formulation of the next plan. So she was really the university, and she were approaching the halfway point in this longer vision. So that brings us to, as I can go down my timeline, and I'm cheating by scrolling. So about the midway point, so say May 2021 is when things started, beginning of the change. And in May, the UCCI board held. So the UCCI board is a board appointed by cabinet. There are 7 voting members from the public, and then there's a handful of ex officio appointees. So I think there's mostly a representatives of government, and I think there's also a representative from the church community. So in May 2021 was the final UCCI board meeting chaired by Mark Scotland. So Mark Scotland was the chairman of the board, and his deputy chairman was Shamari Scott. They held this meeting in May. They talked about a lot of things. They did not talk about Dr. McAfee's performance or her upcoming contract renewal or anything on this heading. So for me, I read this minutes, I say, okay, business as usual. They hit the gavel and said, we're going to come back in September. Well, between May and September, the new PAC government changed the leadership of the UCCI board. I believe...
And this is not extraordinary for governments to do. Usually when we have a transition in government, you will see some changing of who's on the various boards across, across public sector, I guess, for lack of a better phrase.
Correct. And I believe that Mr. Scotland and Mr. Scott's terms were both coming up due in September or in the fall. I think so. So it was like they kind of were ending their own appointed tenureship, which isn't a word. So by the time the board met again in September, Mark Scotland wasn't on the board anymore, and Shamari Scott wasn't on the board anymore. And I think a lot of our readers will know is that Shamari is now chairman of the Education Council. So he moved from UCCI to Education Council. And so starting effective September 1st, the PAC replaced them with 2 new voting members. And so including the new chairman, Gilbert McLean. So Gilbert McLean is now the chairman of the board, and his deputy chairman is a man named Jared Alway, who was a continuing member of the board, and he had actually been on what's called the executive committee, which is important.
I gotcha.
So you have the 7 voting members on the UCCI board. They have these extra non-voting members, but then they have a body called the executive committee, and that's the chair, the deputy chairman, and I believe it's the head of like finance and audit or business and finance, who happened to be Mr. Alway. So that's important because on May 31st, when the old board was still in place, On May 31st, Dr. McAfee sent a letter to this 3-person executive committee and basically said, I would like to express my intention to continue my employment at UCCI. So she was giving notice that she wanted to continue at UCCI in 2022 and beyond. So when the new board came on, 2 of those 3 members of the executive committee who got the letter were no longer on the board, but one of those people was still on the board, and that's important because throughout the following few months, the new chairman McLean asserts repeatedly, he questions how many members of the board actually received the May 31st letter from Dr. McAfee. Because the first time this new board met was on September 27th, and they were charged with considering a response to Dr. McAfee's letter from 3 or 4 months before. So by the time the board met on September 27th, they had to send a response by September 30th. So they had 3 days to consider Dr. McAfee's letter saying she wanted to renew her employment, continue her employment, and or decide whether they wanted to move in another direction. And the chairman and the board decided that they were too close to this deadline, and they couldn't. So they had this contractual deadline of, we have to respond in 3 days, but we also have to obey the public authorities law, which means we have to put advertisements out for the position. They were talking about having to evaluate candidates and this whole process that there's no way they could get done in 3 days. So they came up with an interim solution, and that was to offer Dr. McAfee a 6-month contract extension through June 2022, which they said would give them enough time to tick all the boxes on re-advertising this position.
And it sounds like it would have gotten close to a break point in the school year too, if you will, right? I was going to try to look at their calendar, but December, October, November, December is kind of an odd time anyway. You would rather have, if someone's leaving anyway, to do it at the end of a academic school year, so to speak. I forget what we call them at university level, but
right. Yeah. So and what is normal in Cayman, and I think everybody knows, is when you have somebody who's a non-Caymanian, like Dr. McAfee, and she's ending the term, if in a normal situation, you re-advertise the position, and the main purpose is to give Caymanians, qualified Caymanians, a shot at the job, because, the law is suitably qualified Caymanians get first choice.
Yeah.
So,
and so that likely, and I'm not saying it did or didn't happen, I forgot that part, but that should have happened several months before we were coming up to this renewal point. But at the same time, there was lots going on in Cayman at that point as well.
Right.
Because
so you think you have
government boards don't always meet. There's things get
and
really
there's
weird.
The changing of the leadership on the board. But from a practical standpoint, you think the letter comes in May 31st. They're supposed to respond by September 30th. So June, July, August, 3.5 weeks in September, including the new leadership being in place from 1st of September. And then they meet to talk about this on September 27th. So let's just say they were very close to this deadline by the time they got around to considering a response.
Yeah.
So moving forward in the timeline, so in October, the board convened a special panel, which included new members of the board. So the returning members of the board weren't on the special panel. So new members of the board met with Dr. McAfee and basically said, hey, can you tell us about your performance in office? And she provided them with a couple of documents, including an operational plan and a strategic plan. And the panel basically decided that an attempt to go into details without prior knowledge at this time would not be possible. And another quote is, although significant achievements had been reported by Dr. McAfee, the new Board of Governors had little knowledge of such achievements, and the current time frame to have fruitful discussions with her and the ministry was insufficient. So the position of the board was, you say you did all these good things, but we have no knowledge of if you were doing good or bad, and there's not enough time to get into it right now.
Mm-hmm.
So at the conclusion, um, so they basically said they put this 6-month extension offer to Dr. McAfee on the table. She took a few days to think about it, and she declined. So she said, no, I will just end my employment at UCCI at the conclusion of the calendar year and my initial 3-year contract. I'm not reapplying. I'm not extending. I'm, taking my talents elsewhere. And then, we bring us back to into November. And the board, and for me, this is an important meeting on 10th of November because Chairman McLean prefaces the discussions with a 4-page summary of the events that had occurred since Dr. McAfee sought to renew her contract. So he lays out his own time, not his own version of events, but his own version of telling what I've kind of skipped over. So if anybody's interested in getting the background on this, they can read my story and they can read the timeline. I think it's pretty thorough. And what's interesting to me is this nugget, and this is the headline of the story because I want to bury this lead as far as possible.
He wants to make us read as far down as possible before he gives us the gems.
And this is from the chairman. He said, a majority of members have made it clear that they support the reappointment of Dr. McAfee and believe she has given a satisfactory performance in office. I, as the new chairman, can make no assessment as I have only been in the position approximately 60 days and have not seen any form of objective review of the president's performance. So there you go, it's highlighted. So for me, that's
really good at this.
That's the top line takeaway for me is when Dr. McAfee and the university, and so you had the new board come in, you had a lot of talk, a lot of kind of people's version of events behind the scenes. She announces that she's leaving, and then when it boils down to it, is the majority of the board wanted to keep her on. They did offer her a 6-month extension, which she declined.
Yeah.
So,
what does this
the
mean?
reason?
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
That's the bottom line is they wanted to keep her on for 6 more months and kind of see where this re-advertisement and reapplication and all this where this process take. Maybe we'll do a performance review of some sort. And she said, I'm not, that's not a train ride I'm willing to take.
And, this is one of the challenges for people who are hiring in Cayman. Can you hear the dog scraping on the window, begging me to come back in? Hopefully no. This is one of the challenges when you're hiring people who are from off island too. And I put myself in their position because the uncertainty, quote, component of this can be quite difficult if you're dealing with yourself and your family and moving. And by the way, we had a pandemic kind of in between all this too, so that doesn't help on the certainty front and travel restrictions. If you're recruiting internationally, it is a different kind of game, if you will, than if you're hiring locally. And Cayman is about hiring Caymanians first. It's in the law. But there are certain positions that not everyone has all of the skills or the experience to do. Not to say that there isn't someone who couldn't do that locally, but it can be a challenge. And once you're halfway through strategic plan or vision or the whole thing. Patrick likes how I mix up all into one little cocktail of going forwardness. But it is difficult for an organization when they're having to change midstream, when they're headed down a path that not just the board or the school may have agreed on, but the community as well. So it can be quite difficult to go through this process in this way. I don't know that there's a better option, to be honest, unless you're hiring people for the full term for your, institution's vision, if you will. But
Right. And
ultimately, she chose.
yeah, and it's interesting. I noted this in the weekly newsletter that I put together yesterday. Is for me, and I think for the community, the importance of sussing out these details isn't um, the drama and
No.
this is what happened to one particular person. For me, it's let's look at this process and see what happened and see what the impact and implications are for the university as an institution, because this is the Cayman Islands public university, and they have an acting president, but they don't have a permanent president right now. And as we know, and we've noted, and when we spoke with former board member Tom Simpson and ICCI president Byron Kuhn, is these recruitment processes take a long time, and they're
They really
very
do.
there's a
Arduous.
lot of work that goes into it, both from the board's perspective and the candidates.
Yeah. Just
And
that
here we
combination of
are.
finding the right person to fit within the environment, but also take you where you want to go without, crashing the entire ship. That is a complex hiring decision to make.
Yeah,
So, also, Patrick, look, there are lessons to be learned too, regardless. When you go through and you see, it's not even about the long term future of the institution necessarily either. It can be. Just seeing how this process played out does give you an opportunity to look for ways to improve how your systems function. How is there a better way to do this? You can't even get to that point without looking at what occurred and deciding whether that's the way it should have played out. So, I mean, I just think there's value in analyzing and assessing this regardless.
yes,
But
I
sorry, I
agree. There's
talked all over you again.
multiple points of value to the reporting.
The excellent reporting of
Yeah.
Patrick at Cayman Current.
So I
Okay.
will note that I know the current, we are preparing, we are going back through the board minutes because there's more things that are in there, including the lack of an annual report from UCCI, which may or may not be linked to the qualified audit opinion that the university ended up getting, which I believe was linked to the alleged, I think it's still alleged financial fraud of
Oh,
an
yes, from
employee
that instance.
who's not there anymore. Uh, but I will note that now it's the 7th of February, and I have not seen an advertisement or public recruitment for the new leader of UCCI. I'm limited, of course, to what I see on the UCCI website, the government website, and Indeed, and then doing Googling and looking in industry specific publications. But I haven't seen it. And I guess where the minutes end on December 1st is the last record I have. I believe they've met since then if they've approved those minutes. Is the recruitment process was recommended to be outsourced to outside agencies. So that's
Interesting.
where we are.
So, I've decided you changing subjects now because I found this story that you did great. I think Patrick did a great job on this, but um, your piece on the planning board and the rule about preserving space for schools in large subdivisions. I find this whole issue intriguing anyway, because yes, I do dabble in a bit of real estate here and there, so I hear all the sides of the complaining, whichever version of reality it is. Plus, then I hear it from my news life as well. But much like folks with putting aside parkland and public space and green space. I didn't even know that this existed. So I was really saw your headline. Can you share with folks just a little bit about what you uncovered, and maybe we can chat a bit about why it's important? Although I am watching my clock very carefully because of my training webinar in 30 minutes.
Certainly. So I think this story is interesting because it sits at the intersect. So it addresses two concerns that have been about population growth in Grand Cayman
Mm-hmm.
and limited capacity in some schools, which I've reported on and have lists on the public side. Um, so amid the context of it seems to be getting a bit more crowded here, and then we have this issue which sits at the intersection of sustainable development and the provision of education. So, and then I wrote about this in the newsletter. I started off. Did you know? Did you know that the Cayman Islands planning regulations has a rule that when developers build large subdivisions, they are instructed to reserve space for schools. And the rule is for every subdivision of 400 families, you have to set aside a 3-acre site, which is significant and
Yeah.
expensive. You set aside 3 acres for a primary school. And if you have a subdivision of 2,000 families, you have to set aside a 7-acre site for a secondary school. And and I guess if you read it literally, if you had 2,000 families, that would be 5 groups of 400 families. So would you have to set aside a secondary school and 5 primary schools? Well, I don't know, because this, to my knowledge, has never been tested. And like you, I don't really dabble in real estate, but I have covered real estate and development in Cayman for 11 years, and that was my first job at the Compass. Was a lot of it was reading planning board minutes and
Yeah.
creating databases
Yeah.
and coming up with stories every week. It's a great, if you
It's a
become a
great source
planning
of,
board junkie,
yeah.
there's
Well,
great
what's
stuff in
going
there.
on? And it's
But
actually
I had
has some
never heard of
drama
this
to it, by the way.
regulation. Never heard of it.
I had
Never
not
saw
re
it.
I don't know how I never saw it either. So I was really intrigued by this. And forgetting the expense to developers and the cost of land and all that stuff, I really think it's a great idea to have to do that so that there is capacity for the physical infrastructure of schools, you know.
Yeah, and I think it's important to note that the developers don't have to build the school. They
No.
just have to set aside the vacant property. Um, and I say have to because the regulation says they are instructed to do so. And this regulation's been on the book since at least 2005. I started running out of old versions of the planning law to look at online, so I went back to 2005 and I said, okay, that's long enough
Yeah.
for me. So I'd never seen it, but on 2 occasions last year, when when an application goes before the planning authority, and I think it's an important distinction that so the Central Planning Authority is an appointed board, and they consider applications that either ask for modifications to planning, modifications to planning permission. So, setbacks too close,
Right.
maybe the lot is a little too small,
Right.
etc. They don't consider everything. They only consider people who want to make changes or developments of a particular monetary value or cost. So they consider the big ones and the ones that are asking for special permissions.
Yeah.
So before the board sees it, the planning board, the department of, sorry, before the board sees it, the professionals and civil servants in the Department of Planning and then other departments like Department of Environment, Water Authority, Fire, everybody gets in, analyzes the application, and gives their perspective. Um, and so on 2 occasions last year, Department of Planning staff brought up this Regulation 30, which we'd never heard of before, and said, hey, by the way, if these subdivisions contain 400 families or more, you're supposed to put in a spot for a primary school. And one of the subdivisions was in north of Bodentown, and
That
it's the
was the Lookout
sister.
Gardens, right?
Yeah, it's the sister to Lookout Gardens. So it's I forget what the name is, but it's up there, and it calls for 437 residential lots, which end up being way more than 400 families because some of the lots are big enough to have a small apartment complex on. They don't call for buildings, so we don't know. But if it's 437 residential lots, that's more than 400 families. So the department said, hey, guys, you want to consider this? And the planning board said they approved the application for the subdivision. And then on the point about the schools, they said the provision of schools is the responsibility of government or the private school sector. So the planning board chose not to enforce this regulation. And they said, this isn't our responsibility. It's not the planning board's responsibility. It's government's job, or it's the private school's job.
Yeah,
And,
I
again in
did find that
2021,
interesting. Yeah.
and again in 2021, they considered an application for a subdivision right behind Red Bay Primary and Lighthouse School in Prospect. And this one, I looked at it, and it's kind of unclear whether the subdivision could contain enough homes for more than 400 families based on zoning and density. So we don't know if they would be subject to that rule anyway. But the planning board did, the planning department did bring this up for the board's consideration. And similarly, they said the need for another school site in the area would be subject to government policy and the interests of the private school system. So what they said is, regardless of this regulation, it's not within our scope to determine where and how many schools there should be.
So yeah, I feel like I have a bunch more questions to ask about that in the days and weeks to come.
Yeah, and I think I also think it's important to note that the Central Planning Authority, a lot of the members were changed and the leadership
Yeah.
was changed
So that could
last
change the
year.
perspective.
So these were considered by the former makeup of the CPA. So we haven't seen how the new look CPA, Central Planning Authority, is going to consider this, or if planning staff is going to bring this regulation up again, because to my knowledge, it hadn't been brought up for 15 years.
And the question for me, and this is because I have not done the homework of going through and reading all the regulations clearly on this stuff. Is it an optional choice for them to make? Do they have to do it, or do they?
The Planning Authority has discretion, and they're kind of as an entity, like almost their purpose is to exercise discretion because they're seeing projects that are asking for variances. So in my mind, they can do what they want, or they can do what they want with good justification. I believe is the thing. They can write out the reasons for this. But the way the regulation's written, it says the developer shall be instructed to set aside this space. So it's not a maybe.
Yeah, shall be instructed, but if it wasn't instructed, then they don't have to do it.
Right. Because the planning authority can say you can build 2 stories taller, or you can get closer to the fence line.
I can make a variance. I can approve a variance, or not instruct you to do something.
Correct.
But still, why write it if you don't think it was important to do?
Well, I think it's interesting that they said this is up to the policy of government. And for me, I said, well, aren't the regulations the policy of government?
Yeah.
But
that's kind of what I'm trying to work my mind through is, are these aspirational goals, or are these things that we decided based on the population growth or density, that at this point, this is when we need to address this, and maybe we don't address it this way, but it's and you've looked, like, as if you go through Cayman Current, you'll see multiple occasions where Patrick's talked about capacity at schools. Sometimes they get a little tight, and it's not just private sector or government's desire to spend funds all of the time. Sometimes it's building a school is one thing, acquiring the land to build a school is another. It can be quite expensive, so especially right now. So I'm just interested in how it all fits together and whether going forward we're going to see anything different, because which regulations you bring up as the things that you think are important at that meeting helps determine what the what the CPA does
Yes, it determines the very fabric of our society.
and our meaning and purpose in life. Okay, I do have to go, and I know you do too, but we just want to touch on the fun story today. It's my favorite almost ever
That's
story.
right.
Woohoo! All right, Patrick, talk to us about this
It's an exciting
exciting
new sponsorship.
sponsorship.
Yes.
There, okay, wait, I'm ready. I've got it. Here we go. Boom.
Yes. So I believe most of our viewers will know that the Current has been working on a mini documentary series on TVET and STEM education. And we're very delighted. I really am. This is exciting because I've been talking to these folks for months now before we even started rolling the cameras with a local media production studio called Silver Palm Studios. And they have agreed to come on as a sponsor. And they're going to be donating their expertise and equipment and their time to do the post-production work on our journalism project. So basically where we are now, and this is kind of a project status report too, is my journalist Kayla Young has shot all the footage. She's recorded all the audio. She's writing the scripts, and now we've got it in front of the technical wizards on their computers who are going to knit everything together, clean up the video, make the sound good, graphics, titles, actually, turn raw footage into the finished project. And when we are finished, we're going to have a series of 5 20 TV length, right? So 25-ish minute long videos, and they're also going to knit these together into a feature length documentary presentation. So we're going to have spoon feeding of people 30 minutes at a time, and then we're going to have the whole shebang. So I'm really excited about it because I'm not a video person. I've never done
This
a
is the
long.
loveliest explanation. He's put all the ingredients in, and then they're going to make this amazing dish from the pieces.
It's like a medieval tapestry. Yeah, so it's exciting for me because this is the first time I've ever been involved in a project like this. And so Silver Palm's really great, and it's nice that we were able to partner with a local company. They're interesting because they're located in the Cayman Enterprise City building, but they're not an SEC company.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Which I thought I was all worried about contractual issues and stuff. And they're like, no, Patrick, relax. TBL. Oh, okay.
We just rented the bill. We just rented some space, man.
Yeah, and they have some really, really cool stuff on their website, and kind of showing off their audio and video quality, and I think windsurfing and kite surfing
and that too.
stuff.
But the cool thing is that I love me my video, but the cool thing about this is that it gives you an opportunity to really put together something, more documentary style. It takes a look at various aspects of an issue like this and see, what people have to say about it. I know you love your words and your print, whatnot, but I'm all about seeing people talking and watching them do things. So I'm excited about this because there's a degree of hands-on nature to TVET work. And but at the same time, it often involves, lots of computers and pictures.
And I think it's you want to get meta, even though Facebook hijacked my term.
They stole it.
Meta, like it's cool for me to partner with a local studio because they are a TVET industry and career path.
Exactly.
Like people who are working on this is exactly what we're talking about, and they have local graduates and young people who are as a small step in their career pathway along this. They'll be doing a documentary about these career pathways along this. So
cool.
We're hoping to pull out some clips of them working on the film as part of the film.
That will be good too. And
so
of course,
I want to shout out, as I promised everybody I do, in addition to Silver Palm, our other sponsors are DART, Health City Cayman Islands, and Enterprise Cayman. And then I hope that soon we'll be able to make an announcement concerning Cayman Life TV.
Yes, you will. Even though someone forgot to write her quote for said exciting announcement.
And send
Let's hope
the logo.
in high definition quality instead of the little tiny one in the email. That soon come. But that, you see, this gives us an opportunity to have yet another exciting launch announcement. And then timeline. What's our timeline for not me. I'll do that in a minute. But what's our timeline for the series?
Ooh,
Video takes a while to put together,
yes.
dude.
So
Okay.
what we're gonna do is it's cool because I'm learning. I'm learning what they're doing. I don't even know how this works, but basically there's like three parts of the process. So you've got the storyboarding, which is where they put all the clips together. Then you got to clean up the video,
Mm-hmm.
and then you finally you clean up the audio at the end. So they'll have three different sections working on these. So hopefully when we get rolling, and they've already started working on the first episode, and I've seen a very rough, very preliminary initial version of this, and it looks really great already.
Good.
And so hopefully we'll have three of these episodes getting cranked out at once along the assembly line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'd say the rough timeline for the work to get done is 6 weeks.
That's not bad.
And so that brings us into mid-March. So I'm thinking, okay, beginning of April,
Mm-hmm.
not April Cummings, April the month.
We'll do that.
Hopefully we'll be having, we're looking at doing a premiere event.
That's so fun.
We have a couple of venues that have that are a possibility, but I need to. That's part of my job, right? Is I gotta
You're gonna do that part.
you gotta sucker someone into planning the event for me because it's another area that I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
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 So spring.
It's good. Spring. And we're shooting for a spring debut. I like it. So, okay, I better go now because my training session's in 10 minutes and I need more coffee in between. I'm
Cool.
training to be a better person. Okay. Management school, what can I say? So anyway, everybody, thank you for joining us. Of course, you know that you can get the latest education news at caymancurrent.org with the fabulous Patrick Brendel. And did I misspell Cayman Life? No, I did not. Oh, I worry about my grammar and punctuation and such when I'm with Patrick because, he knows about this stuff. So he'll nail me on it every single time. But it's a new year and he's got lots of stuff going on, and I'm excited to see what comes next for Cayman Current documentary series, only being one of many, many fine projects ahead, I think.
Thanks, April.
Thanks, Patrick. All right, talk to you soon.
Cheers.